for being here for the Arkansas Native Plant Society's November webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and afterwards the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. I'm broadcasting to you live here from I-40 as I'm traveling for work with some coworkers, but Jennifer is broadcasting from the herbarium, which is an appropriate place for this presentation here. The mission of the Arkansas Native Plant Society is to promote the preservation, conservation, and enjoyment of the native plants of Arkansas and to educate the public regarding the value of native plants and their habitats. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can do so by visiting our website at anps.org. You can also check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/Arkansas Native Plant Society. I'd also like to encourage you to join the Arkansas Native Plant Society, and you can do that on our website by going to amps.org/join. The next webinar, this is our final webinar for the Arkansas Native Plant Society for the year 2021, but we will be picking these back up in January of 2022. So there will not be a Native Plant Society webinar in December, but I would like to encourage you to watch the other webinars that I host through Wild Ones Native Plants Natural Landscapes. Joe Ledvina, who is the Arkansas Native Plant Society's president-elect and will be our president in 2023, will be giving a talk on RDOT's Monarch Habitat Initiative. That'll be on Wednesday, December 8th at 12 p.m. And if you're on the mailing list, email list for the Arkansas Native Plant Society webinars, I usually send you the links to the Wild Ones webinars as well. So no need to reach out for that. And then Scott Bealey, who is one of our local Wild Ones board members, will be giving another talk on December 15th at 11 a.m. on Ozark plant communities as design inspiration. So these are going to focus more on the use of native plants in the built and landscaped environment, the type of content, but still usually interesting nonetheless. Our speaker today is Jennifer Ogle. Jennifer manages the herbarium at the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville and is co-author of the recently published Tree Vines of Arkansas. She was a co-editor of the Atlas as our Memorial Awards officer. And she's also on the board for the Fayetteville Natural Heritage Association. Today, Jennifer is going to be speaking to us about the history of the University of Arkansas's herbarium. Again, I asked that all questions be entered into the chat. We'll have Ms. Ogle following her presentation.
Eric, you cut out, but I think you've turned it over to me. Is that right? Am I on? Okay. Okay, I'm going to start. Okay. All right. Uh-oh.
I'll hand it over to Jennifer.
Okay. I think we had a little technical difficulty there at the end, but I think Eric has turned it over to me, so I'm going to go. Hi, everyone. It's Eric. Thank you for having me. It's really exciting. Okay.
Thank you.
It's really exciting to be here and talk about this subject that I'm very passionate about, and that's the history of the UARK Herbarium. I know a lot of you who are here today, and I'm really happy that you're here to see this presentation. And I'm really relieved that I put some of your pictures in the presentation. Some of you who have had a hand in making this place what it is today. And so let's get started with, I know some of you may have never visited an herbarium before, or a herbarium. How is it pronounced anyway? So I thought I'd cover that. Some of you have worked in herbaria all your careers, and so you're very well familiar with what this place is. But some of you, I was 30 years old before I stepped foot in an herbarium, and I really didn't know what to expect when I walked in. I was pleasantly surprised to find out what it was. So first of all, I'm going to say herbarium sometimes. I'm going to say herbarium sometimes. I say it both ways. And I think, the British convention is to pronounce the H and say herbarium. Americans drop that H typically. So, and I just kind of transition back and forth. So you can say it either way, and both ways are correct. If you are talking about more than one herbarium, you can say herbaria, and I'll use that word in this presentation as well. So what is this place anyway? I'm sitting here, like Eric said, behind me are the cabinets. I have some specimens on display and some of the tools of the trade that we used to use and still use to collect plants. Some of these things we still use to collect plants. So an herbarium, it's a botanical library. That's all it is. It's very simple. And what that is, it's a collection of plants that we have collected from the wild or sometimes from cultivation. And we've placed them in a plant press and dried them, preserved them, mounted them on paper, and along with its associated label data. And these specimens are used for research and education. And that label data usually consists of the same things. Hopefully the location. The location is very important. Hopefully detailed directions on how to get to the location where that plant was collected. The identity of the plant, if the person who collected it knows what the plant is, they'll put the name of the plant on the specimen. They'll put their own name, that's important information, along with their collection number, which is a unique number that the collector uses to keep track of the plants they collect. And then also one of the very most important things is the date. We like to know the date when the plant was collected as well. Herbaria are quite common. Worldwide, there are nearly 3,000 of these places, and we have nearly 400 million specimens contained within them. Each herbarium is assigned a code. If an herbarium is registered with Index Herbariorum, which is the organization that tracks herbaria around the world, they're assigned a code. So my code for the University of Arkansas Herbarium is UARK, and each herbarium has a unique code. And so I may by default call this place UARK as I'm talking, and so it's just understood that I'm talking about the herbarium. Herbaria are quite old. The first person who was documented to create an herbarium is an Italian physician and botanist, Luca Ghini, who was active in the early and mid 16th century. He's credited with creating the first herbarium, and this is preserved plant specimens that he bound together in a book. And here is an example. I have one here at the herbarium. It's a book of ferns, and it on its own could be considered a standalone herbarium. Here it is a little closer up. Here's the spine. It doesn't have much information about where it was made, when it was made, who made it. All I have is on the spine, it says ferns. And it's bound in a certain way with some indicators of its time period of when it was made. But when you open the book, these specimens are not glued to the pages. They're affixed to the pages with these strips of paper that have an adhesive on the back. And this book is amazingly beautiful. I don't open it very often. It's quite old. I wasn't sure of the exact year. I'm still not sure of the exact year, but I know it's old. Every time I open a page, though, the plants move around, so I don't open it very often. But you can see this is the Gymnogramma genus, which is changed to another genus. These are the silverback and goldenback ferns. As you can see, the undersides are these just amazing colors of silver and gold. But I did have a clue as to the age of this specimen or this book in this adhesive strip, and all it said was wetting the back be CA, and that's all it had. So anytime I don't know something, I always just have to Google it. So I went to Google and entered these words in parentheses or in quotes, and what came back was this. The full sentence is, in wetting the back, be careful not to remove the cement. And this was a statement that was placed above sheets of postage stamps that were made in Britain in the 19th century, mid to late 19th century. And so I think that this book was made in England in the mid to late 19th century. And they just used these little leftover strips of adhesive above the perforated mark on the sheets of stamps to affix the ferns to the paper. So that's my only standalone herbarium that is similar to what was the convention back when herbaria were first created. Carl Linnaeus, who was a Swedish naturalist in taxonomy, and he's known as the father of modern taxonomy, in fact, he started the practice of keeping specimens unbound and stacked on shelves like this. So this is a standalone specimen of his from the Linnaean Society Herbarium of Siberian larkspur. We have about 14,000 of his specimens still. And so he started this practice of not binding them. It makes it easier to move them around and keep them organized, or if names change, you can reorganize them. And so this is what our herbarium looks like, the inside of the cabinet. So each of our specimens is, each is in an individual sheet. And then we organize them by plant family and then by genus. And so here is an asplenium, or the spleenworts, and here is the species Resiliens. So all of our species of Resiliens is in this one folder here. And so that's the modern practice, and that's how most herbaria are organized now, or arranged. And then we keep them in cabinets. We use metal cabinets these days. They were made of wood early on, but now the better way to build a cabinet is of metal. And they keep the light out. They have a gasket that keeps insects out, keeps them we have a climate controlled room, a humidity controlled and temperature controlled room that keeps the specimens in good health, keeps them out of the light for long periods of time as well. So if you ever get to visit an herbarium, this is what a lot of them look like these days. And this is what ours looks like for sure. And we also have a few fruit and wood collections. So some plants just don't take well to being glued to paper. And so, for instance, this big leaf magnolia, the fruit is massive. And so it doesn't like to be glued to paper. And then we also have some wood of this specimen too, of this big leaf magnolia. So this is kept in a box. And we have a few examples of this in our herbarium. We're the oldest, I don't think I said this, but we're the oldest collection in the state, 146 years old, as I mentioned. But we're also the largest. So we have we think about 125,000 specimens in the collection. And those are just vascular plants. But we also have a decent collection of bryophytes. So the non-vascular plants, the liverworts, the hornworts, and the mosses, they also don't take well to being glued to paper. So these are collected and dried and placed in boxes, and the label is placed outside of the box. We have about 3,000 of those. And so these are just some examples of those types of plants. They don't attain any kind of height because they don't have vascular tissues to be able to do that. So that's what an herbarium is. And that's a little more detail about what the UARK herbarium is. And so why are they important though? Really the main reason herbaria are important is because they provide a secure place for type specimens to live. And a type specimen is simply a specimen that's designated as the point of reference when a new species is described. So it's the specimen that's associated with a name. And so this is a type specimen of Stearns medlar, which is a plant known from only one location, one population in one location, in one place in the world, and that's in Prairie County in Arkansas. And it's known from nowhere else, just about 20 some individuals in this grove, and that's it. And UARK has the type specimen for that. Another important use of an herbarium is to document the plant diversity of a region. So we focus here on the diversity of Arkansas, but we also have a fair number of specimens from states that border Arkansas mostly. It also provides an identification reference. This is an important place for new students of botany to come to learn to identify plants or to hone their skills as they're learning to identify plants. But it's also a place for professionals to come, especially if they're wanting to do a survey on a plant that they might not be very familiar with, and they want to get to know it better before they go into the field and search for it. If we have specimens here of that, they can come here and study the plants and look at the fine features of the species and learn more about how to identify it. So when they go in the field, they can more easily identify it. And then herbaria, especially more recently, have aided in the research of many biological fields. Too many to mention in a talk of this scope. But a researcher has put together a document called 100 Uses of an Herbarium. And she keeps adding to it, and people keep adding to it. But if you just want to search that on the internet, you can come up, what's returned as a list of important uses of an herbarium. But it does, herbaria aids in the research of many other biological fields for sure. So that's what an herbarium is and why we're important, just a kind of a crash course in that. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to talk about the history of this place and who was here, the people who were here, and the things that they did, the plants they discovered, and the work that they did to help aid our understanding of the botanical diversity of Arkansas, for sure. Probably the most important figure at the University of Arkansas Herbarium is Francis Leroy Hardy. He was the founder of the herbarium. He arrived here in 1875, just 3 years after the university opened to classes. They were founded in 1871 and they opened to classes in 1872. He was hired to chair the chemistry department at the time, which he did for several years, but then he was appointed chair of the botany department shortly after he arrived. He had a Bachelor of Science degree. He did not have an advanced degree, but he was an absolute expert in many fields, well respected even at his young age. He was just 25 when he arrived here. He immediately started collecting plants, minerals, birds, and other organisms for inclusion in his newly founded herbarium. He also founded the University of Arkansas Museum at the same time, which now numbers, they have over 1 million specimens in their collection. He botanized all over Arkansas. He didn't drive around, and this was post-Civil War during Reconstruction, near the end of Reconstruction, and the railroad system was being expanded during that time. And so professors at the university enjoyed a free pass from the railroad, and he took advantage of that. He traveled all over the state, extreme southwest and northwest Arkansas, southeast Arkansas, central part of the state, the Grand Prairie. And of course, as you might expect, being based in Fayetteville, he botanized quite a bit around in this area as well. He published quite widely while he was here on botanical topics. And he also wrote Forest Trees of Arkansas, which at the time, with the forest trees being thought of as a commodity, an agricultural commodity, that was an important paper that he wrote at that time. He collected things that have never been seen since in Arkansas. And I can think of two just off the top of my head. And here's one I'm going to feature, is red bay, Persea bourbonia. He was in southwest Arkansas, and all he wrote on the label, I don't know if you can see this through Zoom, but it just says on the label, low country, southwest Arkansas. But we believe he was in Miller County based on other specimens he collected. We think he was in Miller County. He collected this specimen, and it has never been seen since. We think it was collected in 1881 as well. And here's the global distribution of this plant. It's a coastal plain species, and you can see here this orange county here is Miller County. It's highlighted. This is a historic occurrence. You can see how far separated it is from the main part of the range of this plant. You might be inclined to think that it was a mistake. Maybe he was in the coastal plain and collected it and just forgot and put the wrong label on it. But we think he was really in southwest Arkansas, that he actually found this tree there. And my co-author, one of my co-authors on the Woody Plants book, Theo Witzel, has seen this plant in Louisiana and in Texas, just a mile from the border of Arkansas on either side. So it's very, we're certain that he found this plant in southwest Arkansas. Gary Tucker, who is a botanist, now retired, but he was a graduate student here at UARK in the 1970s. He did some research on this plant, and he thinks the sites where he found this plant in 1881 have been destroyed because there has been some effort to relocate it and no one has been able to relocate it. So some of the specimens he collected were very important. Also recently, I found out that there was at one time a specimen of swamp white oak, Quercus bicolor, that he collected in Arkansas. He did not write the location down. That's a species that we've never truly documented from Arkansas. It's in Missouri, just across the border, and it should be here. But evidently there was a specimen that he collected. We don't have that specimen anymore. It was destroyed or lost, we're not sure. But like I said, he was a well-respected professor, a young guy, accomplished a lot in his short life. He died at the age of 50. And while he was here, he discovered 2 species new to science that were described and named in his honor by other botanists, including Harvey's beak sedge and Harvey's buttercup. Now, you might have seen Harvey's buttercup. That's quite a common little buttercup that you see in the spring. And for some reason that I don't know, in 1885, the state legislature ordered all the faculty dismissed from the University of Arkansas. Well, it was Arkansas Industrial University, as it was called. I don't know why they did that, but Harvey left because of that. But in 1890, the university demonstrated their respect for him and their high regard for him by awarding him a PhD. And this was only the second PhD that was awarded at the university at that time. You can, if you're at the university or in Fayetteville, you can come see this. This is on University Walk, just near Silas Hunt Hall. So you should come visit this and see his name on the walk. He increased the collection in many ways. Of course, he started it, he collected thousands of specimens himself while he was here, but he also put a call out in the university catalog, which was published annually. He put a call out to community members to donate specimens of plants, minerals, birds, anything. And he did receive some donations of plant specimens through that effort. But he also offered a prize to his students. Most of the students who came through the university at that time had to take a botany class. And he offered upper level botany classes too, and required a plant collection for that. And as an incentive to collect some nice specimens, he offered a prize of $10, which was a lot of money back then, to the student who presented the best collection of mounted and classified plants exceeding 150 Arkansas species. And I was happy to find that one year they reported that Miss Jessica Holloman, who was a native of Fayetteville and a sophomore at the time, won that prize in 1878. And here is one of her specimens that we still have here at the herbarium. I've only been able to find 4, maybe 5 specimens of hers. I'm not remembering if I found a 5th yet. She did collect some cultivated things as well and put those in the collection. But this is yellow pimpernel. This is a common species around here. You may have seen it out and about. Here's a picture of it alive. But look what a beautiful job she did pressing that plant. And she also identified it correctly, which is somewhat unusual when I was looking at student collections at the time. Oftentimes you would see that the student would write the name on the label and somebody would cross it out. But she got all of her identifications correct, which is why she won that prize, obviously. So I thought that was a pretty significant find that this student won this. She stayed in Fayetteville after she graduated. She married and stayed in Fayetteville. I don't have any photographs of her, but I do know that she stayed local. And then she and her husband moved down just north of West Fork and settled on 80 acres and lived there for the rest of their lives. And she is buried at Evergreen Cemetery, which is the cemetery that borders the University of Arkansas on the south side. So, after Harvey left, that was a big loss for the university and for the herbarium. When he was here, the stated goal of the University of Arkansas Herbarium was to have a representative of every species in North America. Now that's a big goal. That's huge. There are over 20,000 species of plants in North America. But that was their goal, was to achieve a herbarium of that size. This would have made UARK internationally relevant. But that didn't happen because he was dismissed. And we don't know if it would have happened ever, but he did have some big goals for sure. After he left, the herbarium seemed to fall into obscurity for more than 30 years. I've been reading through the university catalogs, and during Harvey's time, the herbarium was prominently mentioned in every catalog, but after he left, it was mentioned less frequently, and then it altogether fell out of the catalogs. It was never mentioned after a certain point. I'm not sure why that is, but I do know that we have, he left over 3,000 specimens here when he was dismissed. And we have about 1,000 of those specimens left of his and of his contemporaries of that time. And we know that they were primarily professional collections from that time. We had some students, but most of the collectors were professionals. But then this period that I call the wonder years, because I just wonder what happened, we only have 46 specimens, and they're from 24 collectors. And these are primarily students from the research I've done. They all seem to be students. And so what this tells me, and what I'm guessing, is that, after Harvey left, there was just no professor who decided that they wanted to advocate for the herbarium. And these places need advocates in order to exist and survive. They absolutely do. Or it could have been a decision at the administrative level to de-emphasize the herbarium. I really don't know. But what I do have is I do have those 46 specimens, and I do have this photograph. of the University of Arkansas Museum circa 1894. And look at the wall back there. Doesn't that look like herbarium specimens against the wall to you? I think that this is the collection or part of it displayed in the museum. So somebody still was displaying these specimens and showing them to the university community and to the public. So that's a cool thing to have. And then, like I said, I have these specimens from students, like this one from Nell Hunt. That's a big name in Northwest Arkansas. I don't know if she was a Hunt family member or not, or if she was related to the famous Hunts, but she collected this specimen from ponds in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So I do know that professors were still requiring their students to submit collections because we have things like this from Miss Hunt. She did a really nice job on that specimen. And then we have this white vervain collected by Charles Julius Leverett, another common name in Fayetteville. We have a street named after a Leverett. He collected this specimen in the 1890s as well. And he somewhat, well, I won't say, but he put as the habitat, they were required to write the habitat. And as the habitat on this one, he wrote everywhere, kind of in a cheeky way. It made me laugh when I read it. And I would have docked him some points though, if I was his teacher, because we wanted to know like what the habitat type was. But it turns out he wasn't wrong. He misidentified the specimen, but this is Verbena articifolia, white vervain. You may have seen this in the field. It kind of does occur everywhere. Not really, but it does like disturbance. And so it occurs in disturbed habitats. It can handle somewhat moist soils and somewhat dry soils and edges and things like that. So he was being a little cheeky, but he wasn't wrong. And I think the reason that he could get away with writing something like this on a label in that period was his father was a professor at the university. So he might have thought he could get away with something like that. And then I do have one picture of one of these students, Alice Simmons. She was a student at the Arkansas Industrial University in the 1890s as well. And the reason we have this photograph of her is because she was a founding member of the Psi chapter of Chi Omega, which is the first chapter of Chi Omega, I believe, in the nation. She had a really strong interest in biology. I have a few of her specimens. She became a biological illustrator after graduation. And while she was here at the university, she was commissioned to draw some plates for a professor who was publishing on the grasshoppers. And this is one of those plates. Pretty neat. And it's really, to me, it's interesting that a woman in this period would be given this opportunity, first of all, and then that she would also be able to support herself in the field after she graduated. So I think that's pretty significant for this period of time. So while I don't have a lot of information about, why the herbarium wasn't promoted during this time, I do still have some interesting things to talk about in this period that I think of as the wonder years. And then we get into a period of increased activity that lasted well into the 50s, starting in 1918 with John Buckholtz. He was a professor he was a professor elsewhere, but in Arkansas, I think he was at UCA for several years before he came to the University of Arkansas in 1918. He was a gymnosperm specialist. So the gymnosperms include the pines and things that bear cones. He had a major interest in woody plants overall, and he co-authored this book, The Common Forest Trees of Arkansas, which was the first version of what would later become Trees of Arkansas, with Wilbur Mattoon, who was a county extension agent at that time. He also conducted extensive field work in Arkansas, contributed many specimens to the herbarium. And I think one of his most significant contributions while he was here is that he described Ash's juniper as a new species to science while he was here at the U of A. And here's a specimen of that. He didn't collect this specimen. It was collected by William Willard, I think, Ash, in whose honor this plant is named, Ash's juniper. Ashii, juniper is ashii. He discovered it. He found populations of it, I think, in the Sylamore, which is north of Mountain View. And he asked Dr. Buckholtz to come see him and come visit this population. And he agreed it was something different. It looked a lot different than the common Eastern red cedar that we all know and don't love, hopefully. But it was different in several ways. And two of the ways included, it's a multi-trunk tree from the base. And it also has these white splotches on the bark that Eastern red cedar doesn't have. And so Dr. Buchholz returned to Fayetteville, and he agreed it was different. He returned to Fayetteville and he started seeing it in more places. He started looking for it. He started finding it, which is so typical, isn't it? I find this happens to me when someone points out to me something that's different, or usually with a rare species, I'll start seeing it more often because someone pointed it out to me. So it ended up being a new species to science. And so this was one of his significant contributions while he was here at the U of A. Another thing, let's switch gears from woody plants and let's talk about some spring ephemerals for a minute. We have 6 trilliums in Arkansas. These are our 3 very common ones. You've probably seen these out and about in the early spring. I'm already getting anxious to see these as the weather turns colder. I can't wait till spring to see some of these. So we have wake robin on the left, green trillium in the middle, and purple trillium on the right. These things look somewhat similar. They have similar colors in their tepals here. The flowers sit right up against the leaves. They're not on stalks. What about this one? This one looks a lot different, doesn't it? The leaves are very narrow. The flowers are on long stalks. You may already know what this is. This is Trillium Buchholzii. Do you know that one? No. You're probably wondering what in the world I'm talking about. This is a plant that occurs in the Ozarks. Those 3 other plants that I showed you occur in kind of rich soils and mesic soils, so with a moderate amount of moisture. This one likes drier slopes and drier habitats. It looks a lot different than those other 3. And it was supposed to be called Trillium Buchholzii because John Buchholz discovered it in the early 1920s. But it wasn't. We know this plant is Ozark Trillium, Trillium ozarcanum. It's a rare species in Arkansas it's centered around northwest Arkansas Ozarks and into Missouri and into eastern Oklahoma, and then scattered elsewhere. It's rare throughout its range. Why was it called Trillium ozarcanum? See, Buchholz discovered it in northern Washington County, just about 5 miles from where I'm sitting right now, on a cherty slope near Elm Springs. He sent these plants. He knew they were different. He recognized them as being different from any other trillium he knew from Arkansas at the time. So he sent it off to an expert at the Missouri Botanical Garden, and the expert agreed. He said, yeah, this is different. And if it turns out to be a new species to science, I would like to name it in your honor, Trillium Buchholzii. And Buchholz said, oh, well, you don't have to, but yeah, go ahead. But it never got named that. And it was actually many years. It was, I don't know, 10 or 11 years before the species was formally described. And it wasn't described by that expert at the Missouri Botanical Garden. It was described by 2 of Missouri's most famous botanists, Julian Steyermark and Ernest Jesse Palmer. And so the type locality ended up being in Missouri instead of in Washington County, Arkansas. And the type specimen was from that location as well. I don't know why that happened. Who knows? I've never been able to find that information, but if any of you know, I'd love to hear that story. But Julian Steyermark was famous because he wrote Flora of Missouri, which a lot of you are familiar with. This is just a comprehensive guide to the plants of Missouri. And then Ernest Jesse Palmer was a very well-known, prolific botanist collector based out of the Arnold Arboretum. Well, he was based in Missouri, but he worked for the Arnold Arboretum, based in Webb City. And he did a lot of collecting in Arkansas. This is a picture of one of his camps. This was in the Davis Mountains in Texas, but these are his plant presses, just absolutely full of specimens. Seemed like a cool guy. He contributed a lot of specimens as well to UARK. Okay, so here's a picture of the plant that Buchholz collected, this little trillium that ended up not being named for him. So he left, Buchholz left in 1926 after making his mark in Arkansas. But in 1925, Dwight Moore came on the scene and as a new professor at the University of Arkansas. So they overlapped by a year and they kept up correspondence for many years after that. Dwight Moore is one of our best known botanists for sure in Arkansas. He was a UA professor, head of the botany department, and he ran the herbarium the whole time he was here. He published checklists. He published pretty widely, but he published checklists on the ferns of Arkansas, the woody plants of the state, and the grasses. So he was working on these groups of plants while he was here. And I learned recently through correspondence between him and others that his plan was to publish a flora for Arkansas. So a flora being a comprehensive accounting of all the plants of an area. And that was his goal for many, many years. And he expressed regret that he was never able to get that done. And we still don't have a flora for Arkansas today, a comprehensive flora. But he did make many significant contributions while he was here. He trained many students who became professional botanists or worked for government agencies. So that was a significant contribution. He also, this is a picture of him in his very first year at the university where he's showing a group of students. I'm pretty sure this is an ash tree he's collecting from with his long pole pruners here. And he's got all his students have samples. And he has 2 nuns in the group too. I don't know the story behind that, but it's a fun picture. I found that in special collections. And this is him a little later in life, well, quite a bit later on the right there. After he left the University of Arkansas, he had teaching appointments at other universities. He also spent his summers during his off time. He'd go teach classes elsewhere. He even did an omnibus university tour where he taught a class in a car as they drove from Arkansas, I think, to Chicago, and stopped and botanized all along the way. So that was a really fun way to teach students botany. He was known as Dr. Dwight. People loved him. He was a really accessible academic. He brought botany to the masses. He was active in the garden club movement, and he would write articles for popular magazines and newspaper articles about native plants and how to use them in the garden. He gave presentations statewide as well. So, and then I think he's most well known by the public for revising that Trees of Arkansas book in 1960, something he was quite proud of. And then something very significant he did that a lot of us really love is he discovered Delphinium newtonianum in 1936. And how often does this happen, that you're driving down the road and you see a plant that's never been described to science before? Well, that's exactly what happened to him. He had been in Jasper in Newton County and was driving south on Highway 7. And he just saw this bright blue pop out of the woods, kind of leaning out of the woods, and stopped and had discovered a new species. Now, if you're probably familiar with delphiniums, they typically, our delphiniums here in Arkansas, they're on a long stalk or a short stalk, but they're just a single stalk with the flowers coming off of that stalk. Instead, this one is branched. So it's a panicle, so it's branched again, and the inflorescence or the flowers are on this wide inflorescence. Turns out not only was it new to science, but it was a rare species that still is, and it's endemic to Arkansas. And so what that means, it's only known from Arkansas, nowhere else in the world. It's known from the Ozarks and the Ouachitas. And he named it in honor of his father, who was named Newton, and also in honor of the county in which he found it, Newton County. He thought it would be called Newton's delphinium, but because people thought of him so fondly, everyone started calling it Moore's delphinium, and the name stuck. And so that's how we know it today. So that was one of his major contributions to science, to botany in Arkansas. Okay. Delzy Demery and Dr. Moore worked together quite a bit. They were professors at the U of A at the same time. They were very different types of people, though. I'm just going to show you again. I can't stand this. Look how proper Dr. Moore is. His nickname was Dr. Dwight. Like, even when people got to know him, they didn't call him Dwight. They still called him Doctor. Just a very proper looking person. And then his contemporary with whom he worked for a time and corresponded with for years, Delzy Demery, just a little rougher looking around the edges. Also a PhD professor. Loved by his students, well respected by other botanists. Kind of a wild guy, though. He collected, reports say, I wrote down 80,000 because that's a conservative estimate. Some people say he collected 300,000 specimens during his lifetime. He was a prolific collector. That's an understatement. He refused to use a car. He owned a car for like 2 weeks, and then he gave it to his sister, and he never drove again. He didn't like it. Instead, he would use public transportation or rely on other people to get him into the field. And he still managed to collect that many specimens. He would just hop on a bus as he would hop on a Trailways or a Greyhound bus and just travel through Arkansas or wherever he was. And then he would tell the driver when he was ready to get off, he'd say, "Okay, I'm ready to get off. Can you let me off here?" And the driver would just stop and let him go. And he'd just walk out into the field and disappear. He did not carry a vasculum. Now I've got a vasculum behind me. That's this metal contraption here. They're about 10 or more pounds. They were metal, they're steel. They're just the heaviest things. And he called them an ungainly contrivance, and he refused to use them. Instead, he carried a plant press in the field with him. And here he is demonstrating the way he carried his plant press. And here's a plant press again. And of course he carried a gun. I don't think he carried anything else. No water, no food, no change of clothes. He wore snake boots all the way to his knees. And that was his signature boot, was a knee-high snake boot. When he got tired, he'd crawl under a bush, he'd go to sleep. He drank from streams, he hunted his food. And when he was done collecting, he'd come out of the woods and deposit his specimens back on the bus and have them hauled back. Yeah, a real character, real character. And this is him later in life. Still, he was active until shortly before his death in 1987. Just an amazing collector. He published a paper on the woody plants of the state in 1933. And then in 1943, he published this little book, Taxodium, which was a catalog of the vascular plants of Arkansas. And here are Doctors Moore and Demery together. Yeah, pretty cool picture. This is in the late 70s, I think. Dr. Moore and Dr. Demery retired in the 50s from the University of Arkansas, or moved on. Actually, Dr. Moore moved on in the 50s, Demery earlier, but we didn't have a formal director during that time from the 50s to the mid 60s, but we did have an interim director, and that was Edward E. Dale. He's one of our most well-written. He wrote so many papers on the ecology of the state. And so he served as the interim director during that time. And so I'd like to just focus on some of the notable contributors to the herbarium, not only during that time period after Dr. Moore retired, but even a little later. I think this is a good time to just focus on some other people who weren't formally involved with the herbarium. And Jewel Moore, who many of you know, she was a professor at UCA for 40 years or so. We have her specimens from her PhD work when she surveyed Petit Jean State Park as part of her PhD dissertation. And Maxine Height, who a lot of people don't know, but she was a spider expert and a teacher. She held a PhD as well. She taught public school near Prairie Grove, which is in Washington County. And she collected in the Cove Creek area, which is this very rugged section of southwestern Washington County. And she deposited her specimens here at the University of Arkansas. Maxine Clark, if you're a member of the Ozark Society, you probably know who Maxine Clark was. She was also a botanist. She had a master's degree in botany, longtime Ozark Society bulletin editor, and she would write botanical notes on some plant topic in every issue. And she collected in the Ozarks in the 1960s. Here she is on the right in this hollowed out log, sycamore log. And we have several of her specimens from her collections. Of course, Eric Sundell, he was a professor at UA Monticello. He's now retired. And he famously, well-known, wrote Revised Trees of Arkansas in 2014 and greatly improved that book that Dr. Moore himself had revised in the 60s. Of course, Dr. Sundell ran the UA Monticello Herbarium for many years, but he deposited some of his duplicate specimens here at the University of Arkansas. So we have many of his specimens here because of that. Ellen Turner, who was never formally involved with the herbarium, but she did a survey of Hobbs State Park, which is in Benton County, and deposited her specimens here. I want to feature her because she's significant today in the world of conservation in Arkansas, a huge advocate for the conservation of native plants and their habitats, and helped conserve Searles Prairie and helped expand it recently. with her efforts to save some land that was just adjacent to that property. And then we're back to the 60s with some formal involvement by UA professors. And so in 1966, Edwin Smith was hired as a botany professor. He was also head of the biology department for some time. He was here for quite a while, up until almost 2000. And while he was here, he made some huge contributions to Arkansas botany that furthered our knowledge of the diversity and distribution of plants in the state. And he did this by writing 2 books, an atlas and annotated list of the vascular plants of Arkansas. He wrote 2 versions of that. He revised it, wrote it in 78 and revised it in 88. And it was a book of every plant he knew to occur in the state based on his research, and a map showing the county level distributions of those plants for each species. He also wrote Keys to the Flora of Arkansas, which is a book that I came up on, and many of us did, a professional botanist working in Arkansas. And it's still used by students today working at the university college level. He's also credited with growing the collection by about 50,000 specimens while he was here. He did some field work on his own, but he wasn't well known for doing extensive field work. He was more of a laboratory guy, but he put a call out to people to donate specimens, to go out and collect and donate specimens, and they did. And by these means, and with his graduate students' help, he was able to grow the collection significantly. A lot of you might know his name because of this publication that came out, I think in 2017, an Arkansas Florilegium by the University of Arkansas Press. Now this was a book that, now this is Kent Bonner on the right, and he's holding a copy of Smith's 1978 atlas in his lap here. He took this book in the field with him. He's a botanist, a naturalist, an artist. He took this book in the field with him everywhere, and he would draw illustrations of the plants he saw next to their names in the atlas. And so here's a picture of Dr. Smith's 78 atlas, and after Kent got a hold of it, what it looked like. Just a beautiful, he turned it into a work of art is what he did. So a lot of you might know Dr. Smith because of that. I have fond feelings for a few of his graduate students. He advised many, many students. I don't know how many, but 3 that I have very fond feelings for in particular, and that I think a lot of you might know as Native Plant Society members, are Susan Hooks, Bernetta Hintertour, and Gary Tucker. I credit Susan and Bernetta and other women working in botany in Arkansas with blazing a trail so that women like me could work in this field with ease. And then Gary Tucker, who I mentioned briefly before, his PhD dissertation was on A Guide to the Woody Flora of Arkansas, which is a book my co-author Theo and I used extensively as we were, if we had any questions about something, we'd go consult Gary's dissertation. It was very, very helpful. And then I had a big surprise this year. I never got to meet Dr. Smith. He died before his the Florilegium was published. He died just a couple years before that. But the Smith family came to visit me at the herbarium. These are his kids, 3 of his kids. He has 4 children, but these are 3 of his kids who came to visit. And I just felt so fortunate to get to know him a little bit through their memories. I pulled out some specimens in his books and some of his original manuscripts. And then they started telling me stories about growing up in the herbarium and what it looked like and what it smelled like and what he was like. So even though I never got to know him at all, I feel like I got to know him a little bit this year when they came by to visit and take a tour of the herbarium. So that was a cool experience. So real quick, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to talk a little bit about the modern era, which started in 1999 when Johnny Gentry took over the herbarium. He was a faculty member for almost 40 years here. And from 99 until his retirement, he ran the herbarium. And he's the person that I worked for when I was here in the early 2000s until 2015. He taught botany classes here. And I think the most significant contribution he made to the flora of Arkansas and to our understanding of the flora was he coordinated the Arkansas Vascular Flora Project. And this was an effort by all of the botanists in the state to get together and truly get an idea of what the distribution and of plants were in the state. And so they made a big effort they mined all the herbaria in the state and around the state that had Arkansas specimens. so that we could truly understand what plants were here. And so they wrote a checklist in 2007, which was just a list of the species they knew occurred in Arkansas. And then in 2013, we published the Atlas, which again was county level distribution maps of all the plants of the state. And many people contributed to this effort. Theo Witzel, Brent Baker, both with the Heritage Commission. Brent Baker at the time spent a significant amount of time working on this atlas as an employee of the herbarium. Eric Sundell took a sabbatical for a semester. I think it was a semester. He can correct me if I've gotten that wrong. Visited the U of A Herbarium and did some great work contributing to that effort. Graduate students like Marissa Williams, Travis Marsico, who's now a professor at Arkansas State University, Sarah Nunn, who was a graduate student at that time. I think between Sarah and Travis, we increased the collections by at least 15,000 specimens, just between the two of them. They were such prolific collectors, and all of these people helped increase our understanding of the distribution and diversity of plants in the state. In fact, I think Sarah she's definitely our most prolific female collector. We have more specimens from her than any other woman in the herbarium. And I think she's probably in the top 5 for any collector at UARK. It's pretty significant. And so this effort was needed. Dr. Smith completed his work alone, and we had the collaboration of many, many people for our atlas. And look at these numbers. He found 2,338 taxa. So that would be species, subspecies, varieties, and hybrids. In his revision, he reported 2,469. And for our atlas in 2013, we reported almost 2,900 of those taxa. So we increased our understanding significantly through this effort. So that was a big deal that we worked on for many, many years, and just a significant product. We were trying to build a comprehensive flora, a flora for Arkansas. We haven't been able to do that still, but that was the ultimate goal of this committee. Maybe someday we'll do it. And so that's the history. And now we're down to me. I was hired back in 2019 to run the herbarium after Johnny retired. And one of the big job duties I have is to promote this place. I'm not a director. I don't have a PhD. I don't advise students. So that's unfortunate that we don't have a faculty member in charge at the herbarium at this time, but we could in the future. So as collections manager, my job is to maintain the health of this collection, to make it accessible to students, but also researchers from other institutions, and also conduct public outreach. So that's one of the reasons I'm here talking to you today, promoting the herbarium. These places tend to be underappreciated by administrators of universities and other institutions. And so they're sometimes under threat of being closed. I don't feel the UARK Herbarium is in that position. I have quite a bit of support from the university and from my department. So I feel like we're in a really good place right now. But we need to promote these places. There are 10 herbaria in Arkansas. They all need to be promoted and visited and used. And they are right now. Fortunately, we're very fortunate. And so that's my job today. And you know, there was a big effort also several years ago to image all of the specimens through a National Science Foundation grant. And so all of the Arkansas specimens in this herbarium and in all the Arkansas herbarium have been or are in the process of being digitized. And I know that many of you are helping with that effort. You're on the Notes from Nature portal, transcribing those labels. It's such an important work that is being headed up now at the Arkansas Natural Heritage Commission. And so if you're interested in looking at some of those specimens, most of them are online now. You can access that portal through my website, or you can go directly to the CERNEC website where all of the specimens that have been digitized for Arkansas live. And you can just kind of scroll through and look at some of those really cool historic specimens. Part of my job also includes giving field trips, doing open houses. And so I am on social media and I post events there. So if you're interested in visiting the herbarium someday, keep an eye out for some of the events that I've got going on, and hopefully you'll get to visit. That's all I have time for. I'm running right down to the wire here. We've got about 5 minutes left. So Eric, I'll let you take over.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks,
Jennifer.
everybody.
It was a wonderful presentation. It's great to learn about the long, rich history of the university's herbarium there. I had no idea that there was so much going on there over this past more than a century.
Yeah.
If anyone has questions, please enter them into the chat. Right now, we have a few comments here. People are very happy. They really enjoyed your presentation. Dot Neely says, Dr. Dell taught the general biology lecture that she attended as an undergraduate and mentions that he was a good-natured, bigger-than-life character.
Cool.
Travis Marsico loves the presentation and thinks it would be great if you wrote this up as a publication. And yeah, I would
Travis,
agree.
You want to help me with that?
Yeah, it looks like Barb Winger also agrees. She thinks that would be a great publication. So maybe she can help you as well.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Cheryl Hall, great presentation. Jennifer, David Darby also thought it was a great presentation. And mentions that it's obvious that the herbarium's in good hands, and I would definitely agree with that. You've done a wonderful job promoting the great work that the herbarium has been doing over the past, more than a century now.
Thank you.
Let's see. Susan Hart and Jennifer, you brought to life the names of people I'll never know, and I've loved it. Yep. So
Thank you.
Reynolds, thank you so much. Awesome presentation. Would love to visit or tour sometime. So I'm sure Brett could get a hold of you through the contact info you gave. Yeah, and Rosalind, yes, has been recorded, and it will be placed on our YouTube channel as soon as I have a chance to get behind a desk and do the needed editing that I do on our videos before uploading them. So look for that in the next week or so. But anyway, yeah,
thank you, everybody. I just want to get that in. Thanks for being here and for your attention and your wonderful comments. I appreciate it so much. Yeah.
So before we go, any questions for Jennifer? Let's go ahead and enter them into the chat. We have a couple minutes.
Oh, Susan wants to have a field trip next time we're at ANPS meeting in NWA. I would love that. That would be amazing.
Yeah, hopefully that'll be in the spring, I think, is our current plans. We've been trying to plan a meeting there in Northwest Arkansas for the past 2-3 years, but we've had to cancel them due to COVID each time. So maybe this year or 2022 will be the year. All right. Well, I guess if there are no questions, I guess we'll go ahead and end this here. And thank you again, Jennifer. Great presentation. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
It's always good to have you speak to us about and share your very vast knowledge of the native flora of Arkansas. So we appreciate you.
Appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Look for our YouTube channel. I'll put the links in the chat. Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, and you can join the Arkansas Native Plant Society on our website by going to anps.org/join. So again, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in 2022.
Bye.